Hello, I'm going to show you how to make a countdown pie timer. One of those that looks like the face of a clock with a little wedge getting larger and larger until it fills the whole circle. It's going to be a React component so that it's modular and reusable, and will take two props, the total length of the timer and the count. You'll need to know the basics: HTML, CSS, JavaScript, CSS transitions, and basic React concepts like creating components, props and set states. Then also ES6 arrow functions and the logical AND operator. Give these a Google if you're unsure. Just a disclaimer, I'm not a professional, I'm just learning. I made this video because it's what I needed to know and couldn't find it. I hope you enjoy. So this is the basic theory. We have a circular div which will serve as the clock face, and ideally we'd just have a little wedge that would go around here, and you'd type in the amount of degrees you want it to be, and that would do it. But there's no such function with HTML and CSS, so we're going to have to use a semicircle. This is something we can make. It's a rectangle with a large border radius here and here, and no border radius here, and that creates our semicircle. And all we're going to do is rotate it. And this edge here is going to be the leading edge of the wedge. And that's all this is going to do. We'll call this the rotator. And obviously that wasn't right, so we're just going to have one other piece which is going to be a mask. So if you look, that covers it nicely, and we've got our wedge there. Perfect. But then if you look, when it hits halfway, then our model falls apart. So we're just going to have to do one thing here. We're going to have to flip this over, change its colour, change some of its border radiuses, and then when our rotators carry on rotating, then that's the second half done as well. So these two simple pieces, the mask that changes halfway through, and the rotator that just rotates based on the count and the total duration. That's all we need. Yeah, so now we can get on with coding the thing. So this is the basic setup. All we want is a React DOM render function that can display some HTML. So just double test that. We want some kind of something to display in the browser. I'm using a live server. Well, I'm using a dev server, but if you have to refresh it every time, that's okay, as long as you can get something on the screen. And also just a style sheet. So we've got a style here, and we'll put the body. We'll change the background colour to white smoke. And if you can get that working, then that's the first step. I'm assuming that was a starting point. But we're not going to have this div. We're going to have our timer component. We've not created that yet, but we will do, so we can import it anyway. And now we can create that timer.js file. Timer.js, and here we'll just import React from the node module React. And with that we can create our class, our timer class, which is a component. Class timer extends the React component, and here is the class. So it's always got to have one function, which is render. Oops. And that's just a simple function that returns some HTML or JSX more accurately. So again, we'll just make sure it's working. It's good practice. Gherkin, and then we need to export it as well. So we just double check, and it is working. So Gherkin, it's all ready to go. So this component is just going to be something that has a state called count, and it increases it by 1 every second up to a certain point, and that's all this is going to do. And then we're going to pass it into a clock component here, what actually animates it and creates a pi timer. So this is just a timer to increase a count by 1 every second. So what we're going to do is we're going to give it a state of count, and to do this we use a constructor, and we have to have super and props so that we can use the this keyword, and then we're going to have the state equal to an object with the only thing in it as count, and it starts at 0. So that's that first bit done. Now we need to actually increase this, and we don't have to click a button to start the timer, so we're going to use a function called component did mount, and this basically, it contains code what will fire as soon as the component is loaded onto the screen, and because this component is loaded straight away, it'll start as soon as the page is loaded. This code will run. We're going to use a function called setInterval, and all this does is basically it takes 2 arguments. The first one is a function that gets repeated every so often, and the second argument is the delay in between when this function is called in milliseconds. So we want it to run every second, so that's 1000 milliseconds, and then the first argument is going to be a function. So we're going to define it right here. It's going to be an arrow function, and the arrow function is actually important because if it was a regular function like so, then the this keyword would refer to this function. But with the arrow function, the this keyword ignores that and goes straight out of it. So when we use this, it will refer to the class of timer. So we can use this set state and it will work nicely. So we're going to be using the previous state, and then we are going to return an object which is the new state, and we're going to say the count is going to be the previous count but just added 1. Very simple. And then to test that it's working, we'll just display it in this div, this.state.count, and assuming no mistakes have been made, this should work, and it does. Very nice. The next thing we're going to do is create a stopping point, basically, when the timer's done, when the timer's full. So yeah, it's not done here, it's here. So in this set of code that runs every second, we're going to put an if statement, and we're going to say if the count is equal to, we'll just say 3 for now, then we're going to do something, and we're going to stop this whole set interval code from running. So we're going to use a function called clearInterval, but this on its own won't work because we could have many set interval functions, so we need to define which one we want to clear, we want to stop. And we do this by setting this whole thing as a variable, a const in this case. So we'll call it timer, and that's that. So this is exactly the same as this, but now it's got kind of a reference point that we can refer to. So we could console log timer, for example, or we can use it in this clearInterval thing. So this should check if count is 3 at every stage, and when it is 3, it'll stop all this from running. And let's see. Perfect. I'm not actually going to use 3 though. We're going to use a prop that we can put into timer here called duration, and for this purpose we'll use 10. And then we just need to swap this 3 with this dot props dot duration. And that is that for the timer. That's that done. Now here we're gonna put in our clock component. Again, we've not made it yet, but we will do, so we can put it here. And it's gonna have two props. One, a count, which is just the state count from this. It's going to be passed down, and then we're going to have duration, which is going to be based on the props from this, also passed down. And then we'll import it. And then we'll create it. Clock.js. Again, we need to just import React from React. And so because this is a simple component, we're just going to use a stateless functional component, which is just set up. It's just essentially a function that returns some JSX. Simple as that. Just looks just like an arrow function with this as the argument, and this is the inside of the function. So we're going to return, and just to check if count is being passed down, we'll say props.count. We'll say seconds, just so we know that it's definitely this, so we can save that, and it's not working. Let's see what's happening in developer tools. So obviously done something wrong. Check the render method of timer. We've not exported it. That must be the problem. Hopefully it should work now. Yes. Perfecto. So now we can go about creating this clock component. What it's going to have, we're going to have a starting div that's going to be the clock face, and then inside it's going to have two divs. It's going to have the rotator, and it is also going to have the mask, the thing that flips from left to right to cover up the rotator when we don't need to see it. So we'll give this a class name of rotator, and this a class name of mask, and then the surrounding div, we'll just call it clock. And this so we can refer to it in our style sheet. So, a bit of style. The clock, we'll make it fairly big so we can see it. 400 pixels by 400 pixels. Give it a background colour of cadet blue. Border radius 50%, so it's a circle, and then we'll just give it some margins, 170 top and bottom, and auto to centre it left and right, and see if that's working. Yep, exactly what we're looking for. And then we'll go about having to go on the rotator. We'll give it a height of 100% of its container, which will be 400 pixels, and a width of just 50%, because it is a semicircle. Give it a background colour of light coral to give it a bit of contrast. And we'll have a look at that. It's essentially what we're looking for, but obviously it should be a semicircle. So border radius can either take one value, or it can take 4. And when it takes 4, we start at the top left, and it does this, 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 in a clockwise kind of rotation. So we want this one to have a large border radius. We want it all the way across here. We want it 200 pixels. Then this one, 0. This one, another sharp corner, 0. And then this one, 200 pixels to give it that nice rounded semicircle effect. So, we'll do that. You can't use percentages here, unfortunately, because we'll try it and you'll see. But this should work. Boom. That's what we're looking for. We're ready to start rotating it. So now that we've got our semicircle, we need to rotate it. So the way we're going to do this is actually using the props.count in this JavaScript file, but just to show you how to do it, we're going to do it in the style sheet. So we use a property called transform, and this is many things like scale or skew, but we're going to use rotate, and that just takes one argument, which is the amount of degrees. So we'll go like that, and then we'll take a look what we've got. So as you can see, it's not done it right, and that's because it's rotated from the center of this semicircle div when we actually want it rotated from around here. So we'll just get rid of that, and we use a property called transform origin. So the natural transform origin is halfway across, halfway down, but we want it all the way across and still halfway down. And this takes it takes two values, the x and the y. So in the x direction we want it 100% of the way across, and in the y direction we want it 50% of the way down. So we'll go 100%, 50%, and that should work. Very nice. So the thing is though, this, if we put some CSS in a style sheet, then it ships to the browser and we can't actually change it then. So we can't use the transform property here. We've got to do it with inline styles in here. So we do this like this, and we just give it a prop called style. We use one set of curlies because it's a JavaScript, and another because it is an object. Because if you look at CSS, it is a set of key value pairs. And then in here we just put transform and then the value. If it's a number, we just put a number like that, but if it's anything else, even 50 pixels, we need to put it in quotation marks because it's a string. So we'll put a string as rotate, we'll do 10 degrees, and that's worked nicely. So to get it to actually work dynamically, we're going to get rid of this 10, and in there put a variable what we're going to create. So I'll just put extra quotation marks and some plus signs so we can put a variable in there. I'm going to call it degrees, and we'll create it up here inside the clock function / component, but outside of the return statement. So what do we want? So we want it to be based on props.count, and if we do that, that should work. But it's working, but it's not quite how we want it. We want it as a fraction of the total duration. But this isn't complete either. So when it's all the way around, this will equal 10 and this will equal 10. But this fraction will just equal 1. But we don't want it to equal 1. We want it to equal 360. So we take this fraction and multiply it by the full amount of degrees in the circle, which is 360. And this should be a nice 10-second timer. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, halfway. Perfect. One last thing to just make it smooth, we use transition here, and say, so transition is just from each value, instead of jerking from one to the next, it goes smoothly. So we just choose a property, and it is the transform property that we want to transition. How long it's going to take? 1 second, because we're changing it every second. And then the easing function, which is like whether it goes slow at the start and then fast, or vice versa. But we just want it to go the same speed all the way through the transition, so we use linear. And that, perfect. That is the rotator part of the whole timer done. All we need now is a mask to cover up each half, and then we're finished. So we'll just style up the mask first. It's gonna change, but we'll do the mask how it's gonna be on the first half, just using class mask. So we essentially want it to be quite similar to the rotator. So I'll copy and paste a lot of this. Height 100%, width 50%. Background colour we're going to change into our cadet blue, and border radius is going to be the same. And that's the right shape. But it doesn't look right. That's because when you're designing most web pages, you don't want content to just be piled on top of each other. You know, it's paragraphs, it's pictures, so it goes in a document flow in order, either from top to bottom or left to right. And to change this, we use position absolute. This takes it out of the document flow, and it just kind of makes it, if a div has a position of absolute, it's kind of its own entity. It doesn't play by the normal rules, and therefore they can be piled on top of each other, because it's like they don't even know about each other. So we go position absolute, and the rotator as well. And then, well, we need to do one thing, but I'll show you what happens if you do this. Because they've been taken out of the document flow, it's almost like they don't recognise that they're in this clock container anymore. So when we say height 100% and width 50%, it's done 100% of the whole page and 50% width of the whole page. So what we need to do is we just need to put the container a position of relative, and then any children that are absolutely positioned will be positioned absolutely but relative to their container. And that's that. So if you see, you've got this semicircle here covering half of it, and it looks perfect until it reaches halfway point, and then it looks wrong. So at halfway it needs to switch over. First we'll just style what it will be like when it switches over, then we'll actually switch it over. So on the second half we're just going to add a new class, and it's going to keep all of the properties of this one, but we're going to use mask2 to overwrite some of them. So when it has a class of mask1 and mask2, which we do by having no space between these two. So all these are right, but we're going to change the background colour to light coral, and we're going to change the border radius to the opposite corners. So here we've got a top left and bottom left as 200 pixels, but we're going to have it the opposite. So top right and bottom right. Yeah, I think that's right. So that is the right shape, but we just need it moved across, and we use a property called right, which can only be used on absolutely positioned elements, and it tells you if you say right, it's the distance from the container's edge to the right edge of this. So we're going to use 0. And if you look at this, here it is here, and it doesn't look right for now, but for halfway, that's exactly how we want it to look for the second half. And that's that. So what we want to do is we want it to look like this for the first half and this for the second half. And we're going to do that by dynamically adding this second class when a certain condition is passed. So we'll change this for a JavaScript expression, and in it we'll just have mask like we always had, and then onto it we'll concatenate a variable we'll call it a second half, and this variable is going to equal mask2 in the second half and nothing otherwise. So we'll just define that here. So the way we're going to do this is have some kind of statement here, a true or false state. Right, I'll show you. So we use this AND operator here, and then at the end of it we're going to have mask2. And when you're setting a variable using this logical AND operator, you basically have a statement here that can evaluate to true or false, and if it's true, then this thing here returns mask2. It's almost like this is like a miniature function that says if what's on the left of the AND signs is true, then return what's on the right, and if it's false, return nothing or undefined. So if it was this, second half would equal mask2, and it would be, we'd have both classes here. But if it was this, this would be false, so this would return undefined, and we'd just have the class of mask here. So we need something that's only true in the second half, and we're going to use this fraction again. If you want to pause it and guess, then you can, but otherwise I'll tell you. And so this is a fraction of the count to the duration. So at halfway, the count will be 5, this will be 10. So this will equal a half. So in the second half of the timer, this will be over a half. So if we just put over 0.5, that is saying when this fraction is over a half, then return mask2. And that should be done. We'll just do one more thing that I forgot. Because now if this is concatenated direct onto there, it'll look like this, and that's not a class, it won't recognise anything there. So we just need to put a space there. Or we can put a space here, but yeah, either or. We're going to put one here. And this should be done, this should work. This should flip over at halfway, and it should be so smooth that you won't even see it. It's flipped over. You didn't even notice. And that's our timer done. Yeah, that's it done. So I went through it quite slowly to try and explain all the concepts, and also it's my first video, so I was a bit ropey, but that's that. And if you look now, we've got our nice timer here, and that's all we see. That's all you can just use it straight from that. And so you can put this component anywhere, and you can change the duration. You can put a little short timer if you want, 4-second one, or you can make a minute timer. And it just kind of shows the power of React components, because you do all your coding here, but what you ended up with is just a nice little component that you can customize using some props, and then you can put it anywhere you want. Like if we just yeah, you could put 3 of them and it'd work, for example, all with different times in it. And yeah, there is your PyTimer. Hope you enjoyed. Bye bye.